Whenever I talk?
Yeah, no.
Okay, always and forever. Good morning. I know you're a small group, but good morning. We're here to talk about World News Day, a celebration of the power of journalism. My name's Natalie Turvey. I run the Canadian Journalism Foundation, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Robin Doolittle, a reporter with the Globe and Mail, Madhav Chinappa, Director of News Development Ecosystem at Google, and Solomon Elliott, Founder and Executive Director of The Student View. How many of you saw Maria Reza's keynote last night? Did you catch that in the hall? It was inspiring, and it was powerful, and it was terrifying. It was a call to action. So this is not a feel-good, have you hugged a journalist today kind of session. This is a rallying cry at a time when the abuse and manipulation of truth is part of the global playbook in so many countries, and democracy is at risk. So on May 3rd, 2018, the Canadian Journalism Foundation launched the first ever World News Day to celebrate the critical and important and good work that journalists do around the world. And it does beg the question, why did a land of so-called hockey and poutine enthusiasts, and one that gifted the world with Justin Bieber, launch World News Day? And if you don't know what poutine is, you have to see Robin and or me after this session. Your life begins today. So why Canada? Well, Canadians have a global reputation for being nice, for being polite, sometimes being a little beige. It's all true, but because of this, we are natural consensus builders, we're diplomats, and we're leaders around important issues in the world. It's inbuilt in our DNA. And you see these qualities in our country's leadership. The other Justin that we gifted the world is, of course, Justin Trudeau. And putting aside the very bad month our Prime Minister is having right now, you can't argue that his social media savvy, his diplomacy, and his youth has served to skyrocket Canada's global reputation as a country committed to big issues: climate change, gender balance at the highest levels of government, immigration, and a healthy and free press. And the Canadian Journalism Foundation just did a poll taking the pulse of Canadians on their trust in media. And as a country, 91% of Canadians believe that a healthy and free press is essential to democracy. So at the same time, as we all know, truth is under attack, trust in the media is in decline, the business model is being pummeled, especially at the local news level, and the spread of misinformation has never been faster, all threatening to undermine a free press and a healthy democracy. And on top of that, journalists, and I'm looking at you and you and you, have historically done a pretty poor job telling the world what they do every day and the rigorous standards they adhere to in their work. Canada is also home to some world-class journalism, and our industry is reeling from a lot of these same forces. So with all that in mind, on May 13th, and with all the news leaders in Canada on our board of directors, the CJF was uniquely positioned to take action and launch the first ever World News Day. This wasn't a day for journalists preaching to the choir. This wasn't another award ceremony. We have a lot of those. This was a moment to feature journalists telling their story, telling the public what they do every day, but more importantly, putting citizens at the center of the day, telling people about how journalism has affected a profound change in their lives and their communities. We also had some live musical performances from Canadian artists, because you need a bit of a zhuzh, a bit of sexy with the broccoli to draw eyeballs and attention to the cause. We had debunking experts talking about the threats of misinformation in all of its forms. And we had tech companies like Google speaking to their role in preserving and supporting a healthy and vibrant news ecosystem. So please have a look at World News Day.
Good evening
evening and welcome to World News Day. This evening we're going to hear lots of behind the big investigative stories from both the journalists and also the journalist subjects.
Journalism can be a tremendous vehicle for good.
When I talk about the power of journalism and trust, it's not easy as a family going through something to share your story out loud into the world.
With so much information coming to our eyes and ears 24 hours a day on every platform, now more than ever, we need good journalism.
Your stories are a gift, and for it to have this lasting impact is one of the proudest achievements of my career, and it's all because you said yes.
Don't make me cry.
The very concept of free expression challenges us, the internet challenges us, because believing in free expression really means accepting that there will be expression that each and every one of us in our own way finds uncomfortable.
Thank you for letting us all speak about an industry that is so important to us and that right now may be facing its biggest challenge yet. So thank you.
I want to turn it over to Robin. Now you saw her on our stage to talk about why World News Day is important to her.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm an investigative reporter at the Globe and Mail, which is a national newspaper in Canada. I work at this paper that is sort of unique in the country. We're probably the last newspaper that has real resources. I spent 20 months doing an investigation into the rate at which police services dismiss sexual assault complaints as false or baseless. It's called unfounded. I won't get into it too much. You can read it if you want. It's really, really, really long, so definitely make some time and some coffee if you're going to try to read it. But it was really this incredible piece of journalism that changed things in the country. And what was wonderful about talking about it on World News Day is that it wasn't me kind of blathering on about how great journalism is. It was me bringing the main source of the story on stage and really celebrating her and the sacrifices that she made to tell her story. And that is what I think all of the panelists did on World News Day. And it was really incredible because it really put the focus on the people who are risking everything. And I think right now, if you've seen the program of this festival, there's a ton of sessions about trust and our credibility issue with the public right now. And journalists have a lot of work to do to rebuild that. And what I think we need is just a better way of getting the public on side. And part of it is taking the focus off of us and putting it back on regular people. And I think that was the real great thing about World News Day. That kind of was something I'd never seen before. They're really celebrating the sources and the sacrifices they're making.
Good morning. Sorry, I can't tell if that's working. No, I think it is. Good morning. I'm Madhav. I work at Google, and I'm on this panel for both a professional reason, but also a personal reason. So I should probably get the professional one out of the way, and then I'll talk about why this really interests me on a personal level. So I think professionally, as you saw there, my boss Richard was at the event and was deeply impressed by it, and it seemed really aligned with everything that we're trying to do in the news industry through the Google News Initiative, GNI. We're trying to work with the news industry. Trying to elevate quality journalism, evolve the business models, and empower journalism through technology. And what Richard was struck with, and what I was struck with, especially talking to Natalie about the vision for this, is that this is really about trying to reclaim the narrative on news. And this is where I personally am very interested in this. You know, I started my career at Associated Press on the TV side. I was at the BBC for 9 years, and I've been at Google for the last 8 years. And I think I consider myself a news person, and when I look at the narrative around the industry that I love right now, it's deeply negative. It's all about fake news and all of this, and Natalie eloquently talked about the attacks on legitimacy and everything like that. But in my heart, I truly believe it's a really important industry with a lot of powerful things that is and should be a force for good. And somehow everyone seems to be talking about it or characterizing it in a negative way. And I think that we need to try and see if we can reclaim the narrative on that so that people understand the importance, the legitimacy, and the power of journalism. And that's why I'm personally very interested in trying to help a World News Day try to achieve its goals. Because I think if we can reclaim that narrative, then we can build on that, build the trust, get all of that back. But it's really about trying to make sure that people understand the importance of it from my kids to my parents, right? I think if we can have that conversation in a better way, it'll be better for all of us.
Good morning, I'm Solomon Elliott and I run the Student View. Just a bit of context behind what I actually do. We're a media literacy charity that creates newsrooms in schools across the UK. I started the charity while I was a high school teacher in 2015, and I was super alarmed at this kind of scourge of misinformation and the disconnect between the people who I taught who were from a low-income background in London at the time, I just saw it as a recipe for disaster. So we scaled from it being in my classroom to being a national NGO with the support of Google and the Financial Times, and we have 80+ journalists who volunteer. I think it's really important that journalism, it's been quite complacent in all honesty, and we have as a kind of world, and 2016 was a real reckoning for us all. I think it's really important to generate a mass movement, and that starts at the bottom, for want of a better word, in schools. In the UK, we have something called World Book Day. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's a real fixture in our educational calendar. Each year, around 15 million £1 book tokens are given away to essentially give every child under the age of 18 a book. I thought to myself, why isn't this in schools? So then I emailed Madhav, and I said, I've got this great idea called World News Day. And he said, well, it actually exists, Solomon. Natalie set it up last year, so you should probably go and chat to her. So we did, and we had a great conversation, and it's really important. It's a shame that there aren't that many people in the room today, although there should be, to kick off a movement like this, but if we can generate a bit of a buzz, that will go a long way to making journalism important in the eyes of not just journalists, this massive echo chamber, but society and the world at large.
I agree with Solomon. We should have more people in the room today, and we're thrilled that you're here. So we're going to use, I think the end of the session, we want to hear from you on how you can participate and how we can engage you in our World News Day. We see a lot of smiling faces and nodding, and we want that. But this is not just about patting ourselves on the back and boosting our own industry. This goes to the heart of the business model and the future of sustainable journalism. And in thinking about World News Day, I thought, what if I was speaking to a room full of Matthew Ingrams? Does everyone know who Matthew Ingram is in this room? Well, Matthew is Canadian. He is a friend, so I can pick on him a little bit. And he's one of our finest media writers and a global thought leader. But Matthew is also a little bit skeptical and a little bit cynical. And by a little bit, I mean always and forever and as long as he's been alive, like any good journalist. So what would it take to get a room full of Matthew Ingrams to see the value in World News Day and to engage? Well, in speaking with Matthew, there are valid business reasons for why everyone needs to take part, or why it should be important to you. It used to be enough, as we all know, to print the news. Advertising is such a small part of the business model, and advertising is not going to save your newsroom. Readers are becoming the bigger model, and newsrooms need more and more to build strong emotional connections with the readers of any kind. You need to convince them that you're on the same side and that you share a passion for something. And to thrive in an increasingly noisy landscape, you need people to subscribe, to donate, to become members and patrons. And to do that, you have to show them you have something compelling. More than ever, if you can create and build and invest in those relationships, those people will want you to succeed. And World News Day is a way to incite passion in your audience. You want people to say, I love this place, and this is why. They care about the same things I care about. And the future can look bleak, as as Madhav outlined, but if you share your worth with your audience and your readers and your lifeblood, you can make them care. And this is a lot of what you do, Robin.
Yeah. So before I came to the Globe and Mail, I worked at the Toronto Star. which is the largest distribution paper in the country. And I was covering the City Hall beat. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Rob Ford. He was our crack-smoking mayor. He's known as our crack-smoking mayor because I, along with 2 other journalists, saw a video of him smoking crack. And the Star, I worked on the Rob Ford investigation for like off and on a year and a half, 2 years while I was covering City Hall. And it started with this, looking at the fact that he seemed to be a very serious alcoholic that was really impeding his ability to do his job, and his staff wanted him to go to rehab. We plucked away at this story forever, meticulously gathering sources and going through social media, documenting every time he was, because he would go out to bars late at night, there'd be photos. There was all of this evidence this was happening. We had staff members talking about it. That story ran. He called us liars, pathological liars, denied the story. Shortly after, I got a call from a self-professed drug dealer who was saying that they were selling a video of the mayor smoking crack. Fast forward, I think it was another month, the drug dealer wanted $100,000 for this video. When the Star wouldn't pay it, they showed it to Gawker. Gawker went home and wrote a story immediately, which kind of forced our hand, so we published a story. It was a long chain of events that led to that moment of that story being published, and there was lots of, you could follow the story as the Star wrote about it. They did a poll in Toronto, which is the largest city in the country, the capital of the province, the most progressive theoretical city in the country. And half of the people living in Toronto thought that the Star had fabricated that story, that we had seen a story posted on Gawker, and then within an hour, met at headquarters and said, okay, we just got scooped. We need to make up that we saw this video. And that just was a flabbergasting thing for me as a reporter, that I can see people saying maybe this shouldn't have been written, this is his personal business. I disagree, but there's that argument. But then there's the idea that people would think that the Toronto Star just completely made something up and printed it. Like, how do they think newsrooms work? We're not even organized enough to make something up that quickly. And that was a real wake-up call for me as a journalist. That was 5 or 6 years ago now, which seems nuts, but maybe 6 years ago. And ever since then, I have really viewed half of my job, fully half of my job, going out and talking about journalism and doing talks like these and speaking about my work and bringing people in to my process. Because I do these very long-term projects, especially, you kind of just see the finished product. I disappear for a year and then I kind of come back with something. You see that, I think, in newsrooms across the world now, that there's a lot of these explainer videos, the kind of the story behind the story. And I'm always shocked, but readers love them. And readers love hearing about how we do our job, and they're surprised at how we do our job. I think people don't understand the lengths that we twist ourselves into to try to be fair and balanced. They don't know, that, for example, you go to all the sources but before a story is published and give them a chance to comment, and how much time you give them. All of those little details that seem kind of basic to us are really interesting to readers. So I think the great thing about World News Day is we highlight our journalism, but it's more than that. It's kind of lifting the curtain about how we do our journalism. And newsrooms across the world, you can take your own kind of spin on it, but it's about celebrating what we do and bringing people into that process. And my favorite thing about these types of events is always the Q&A after. Like, I love hearing what do people want to know about what I do, and that's also a great way for us to kind of take the temperature on where are we failing. If they're asking questions that we think they should know the answer to, then we need to do more outreach on that issue. And frankly, as talk about the narrative, like, we've lost our own narrative. We are not, I don't know how your newsrooms are, but I find news outlets are not great at their own PR and not great at communication all the time. And that's something that this gives us a great opportunity to do. It's a place to tell our story. And it's really like it's not just patting ourselves on the back, which I think journalists also like to do, and which maybe the public is kind of fed up with in an extent of kind of us, because we've been framed as the elites. So again, really through social media to connect directly with people about what we do and how we do it.
I'd just like to pick up on one of the points that Robin made about bringing people into the process. I think I think that's one of the really interesting things that World News Day has done and will continue to do, is about opening up the process of journalism. And I see actually this growing as just as a thing that more journalists are doing. Whether it is, back when I was at the BBC, one of the very, very small things that we did, which was actually somewhat controversial in the company at the time, and this is about a decade ago, was when they were doing a television report from a war zone, the correspondent would say, "I am here with my camera person X." Because for the last number of decades, it was that magical person who just shows up in the war zone and was there. And there were all these, there used to be jokes on some of the BBC comedy shows, or some comedy shows, which is like, wow, really bad things happen whenever John Simpson shows up. What's the, But I think it was interesting, the discussion was, the more traditional view was, well, we'll just do the art form that we have done for the last decade. And then the counter-argument was, we need to explain that it's not just that one person with the microphone in front of them, that there's an entire process behind that. And then they did some audience research, and that simple thing that they had done actually added to the trust of the pieces. And I think you're seeing that on the more digital side now with things like the Trust Project, where they're being much more open about that, the explainers that Robin was talking about. But I do think that this process of opening up and celebrating that and celebrating the process will, on some levels, demystify some of the myths that are out there about us, whether that's about the journalistic process or even even the business process, right? I think it was a few weeks ago, there was or maybe it was last week, I'm sorry, I've been traveling, so my head's all over the place. I think it came out in the US that, in the US, inside the news bubble, we talk about the local news and the local news deserts and the pressures on local news. And Pew did some analysis and asked the audience, and, the vast majority of people thought that local news was profitable, right? There's this strange disconnect going on between the news industry and the audience that it serves, and I think World News Day is something that can help bridge that gap.
Completely agree with what Madhav's just said. I think it's really important, and I love what Natalie did last year with platforming the case studies of individuals who've had their lives changed by journalism. My partner's a journalist at the BBC, and she literally has this hotline where people will call her up saying, I'm in crisis, and she works on a story and it can often change their lives, so I see that firsthand. Something we're doing in the UK to celebrate World News Day is having an event called News Talks. So what we're going to do, it's an editorial conference. It's already part of what we do, our program. We get kind of 10 to 12 kids together with some really senior leading journalists, and they're going to give them their view of what the news is, because we've got this massive disconnection. Something that really hit home for me when I started the Student View was we were working in a school which was in Kensington, and we did the program there one year. It was really successful, and in the second year we couldn't complete the program because it was a school at the base of Grenfell Tower. So that was a really rude awakening of how, when you ignore a community, what can actually happen. So I think it's really important that we just keep that in mind. We have to make the public aware of what journalism is, because there is so much skepticism and cynicism out there, and we have to all tackle it.
You might want to explain Grenfell Tower for not everybody.
Yeah, so Grenfell Tower was one of the kind of worst scandals that's happened in the UK in the last 100 years. A tower block which had lots of cladding, so essentially flammable coating in a tower block, caught fire, and over 70 people died. So that's what Grenfell Tower is.
We've heard of 4 or 5 innovative ways and reasons for connecting, innovative ways to connect with audience and the whys behind that. We've laid out 5 ways that newsrooms, industry bodies, and citizens can get behind our World News Day. We want to open it up to you to get your thoughts and more ideas to add to this list. But these are just 5 sort of ready-baked ways that newsrooms can participate in World News Day. These actions are easy, and they can unite big and small newsrooms, known and unknown, and industry groups, youth, and citizens around the power of journalism. You can run a World News Day ad, and we are happy to provide the creative for you. You can share your stories around the hashtag News Matters on World News Day. Why not solicit an opinion piece from a citizen who has been impacted in a positive way to talk about the changes in their community or in their lives? Devote an editorial to why news matters on May 2nd, or open your newsroom to the public, and so they can meet your journalists and they can see how this is done every day. And we're very open to more ideas from all of you. Solomon came with this amazing idea of connecting students to journalism, and that's what we want to do with this day. And if you commit, we will shout it at the top of our lungs from all of our platforms on World News Day. We want to share this and amplify it and have partners in the world involved. We've done some initial soundings with global groups, all of us, at different events and conferences. And it started to ignite something with news organizations around the world. And we have some important partners who believe in this movement, but we want to see more on the list of all sizes and in all of the countries that are grappling with the same issues we all are in the media. So before I get to our second World News Day event, I want to open it up, unless our group has anything else to say, open it up to all of you and get your thoughts on World News Day and how you think you might want to get involved. Microphone? Yes.
Did you get in touch? Hi, my name is Michaela. I'm at the Google News Lab, but I'm participating in a project that has a lot to do with this. Did you get in touch with people of Pop-Up Magazine or Live Magazine in France, or the one I'm representing is Diario Vivo in Spain? It's about... Thank you.
You're being auto-tuned while you talk.
Yeah.
So those projects are taking journalists on a stage to talk about their stories from a very personal standpoint. And it's amazing. If you heard of Pop-Up Magazine, it's just like, it's full of people. People get out of there really excited because they realize, I've had people telling me things like, I didn't know you cared so much. I didn't know you could spend nights without sleeping thinking about a story or working on it. So it would be interesting for you to talk with them as well.
We'd love to connect with them, and we've seen that same effect. We've put foreign correspondents on our stage talking about what they've seen and fallout from the field, and audiences are moved, and there's that bridging that gap of understanding of what journalists do and how much they care, as you said. Do we have any other quick questions, suggestions, thoughts on how we can engage?
Don't be shy. I know it's the morning after the night before.
I'd also love to hear from any of you what your craziest reader misconception story is. While you think about that, oh my gosh, I can't believe this person had just, thought I made up a story or something like that. Those stories are always fun. I've been saying this for a while in my own newsroom, but I think we really need to reframe the way that we think about pitching ourselves to readers. The subscription model is great, but especially right now when everyone is so depressed and anxious about the world, I really think that regular citizens want to do something about it. And I think that there is an argument that could be made that it's like you're donating to truth. It's not so much that you're buying a subscription, it's that you're sending your $30 a month or $15 a month to help journalists preserve democracy. And this I see is very much in keeping with that idea. And sometimes, when I talk to my friends, I'm a dreaded millennial. And, some of my friends subscribe to news outlets, a lot don't. But the ones that do, that's what they say. That's why they do it. That they think it's important, it's worth their money, it's worth their attention, to help because they see the value of journalism, and that's why kind of shouting from the rooftops when we actually get action, when things actually happen. That's why something like this is kind of a marketing tool for us almost.
Hi.
We have a question over.
Oh, wait, she's got it. Yeah.
I think it's on. Is it on?
Yes.
Oh.
Do you want the auto-tune mic instead?
No,
just
I'm good, thanks.
Okay.
So I'm Heather Brooke. I am an investigative journalist, and I run the investigative journalism course at City London. And I thought I'd a few comments as we've got time. But one thing I've noticed is, our demand for doing this investigative course has tripled in the past 2 years, which is very inspiring. It shows that young people kind of really see the consequences of not having good news. And it resonates. It's a message that really they get, and they want to do that work. But then when you talk about misconceptions, even those students have a lot of misconceptions when they come on the course. And I would say the main one is they don't understand the amount of work that a journalist does to verify information. Particularly, they're very lax about getting people on the record. They think you can just sort of have anonymous people like running around in stories all the time. And to make sure that they get their first name, last name, that's something I have to bang on about constantly. So I don't know how that message has gotten out in the world that, journalists just go around sort of making up people, and that we all, that you don't have to sort of nail down a source.
I was in a session yesterday, and I'm parodying a fact, and I don't know where it's from, so this is very bad journalistic practice. But at this session yesterday, someone was talking about a study that showed that like a huge number of readers think anonymous sources are anonymous to the journalist. It's like, Jesus, like, that's scary. And that's kind of one of those things that we need to do a better job. I find sources, I'm always, there's real confusion around what's off the record, what's on background, what's not for attribution. When I look back on the early years of my career, and I think some of the mistakes that I made, it was through the fact that I knew what those things were, but my source didn't always. And I think this is, I'm a little bit off topic here, but I think getting into the business is changing, the way that we describe the business is changing, and the way that we do our jobs is changing. When I started, I've been, working at a daily newspaper now for, I guess, 13 years. I very much felt that it was kind of like, I'm the journalist, I'm gonna go in there, I'm gonna get the story, it's my story, you give me the facts, I'm gonna write it how I want, and I'm gonna go. And very much I've seen a shift, at least in how I do my job and some of my colleagues that I really respect. I don't want to say it's a collaboration, but I'm much more, I walk my sources through things a lot more. And part of it is because of the implications of what social media and how Googleable everyone is. So for example, I spent my 20 months doing my sex assault investigation. Really quickly, it started with me, there was a huge high-profile sex assault trial in Canada in 2015, and everyone was, his name's Gian Gomeshi, he was a host at our big public broadcaster. And he was kind of this like poster feminist man. So to then be accused of sexual assault, it was hugely scandalous. And it got the whole country talking. And everyone was like, the system is failing sexual assault victims, and it struck me that I've been having that same conversation since I was 15 and nothing ever changed. Yada, yada, fast forward. I was trying to figure out a way, could we quantify rape culture? Was there a way to actually measure it and see if that's actually true? And I came across this stat that I'd never heard of before, and it was called unfounded. It's a police dismissing cases that they didn't believe. And they were not being counted. If a case was unfounded, it meant that it just did not, you could not see it anywhere in any of the stats. And I found that 1 in 5 sexual assault complaints in Canada was being dismissed in this way. And then in addition to that, I investigated 54 specific cases of sexual assault. And that involved interviews with the complainant, the police, getting their police records, their health records. And these people really opened up because they didn't know what I was going to find. And I explained to them that the best thing I can do for you is investigate this as if I don't believe you. And I walked them through all of that. And this is why I have to come at it from that approach. And they got it. Like, no one was like, how dare you? Everyone understood. And a lot of them, in Canada, we have very restrictive access to information laws, so I can't access any information from the police. The police won't even confirm if they investigated something or not. So I had to get all of these individual complainants to sign releases to get their files. And they didn't know what I was going to see in them. And it was, anyway, like I said, it's spent 20 months, and we wrote individual stories about each of those cases as well as the stats, yada, yada, yada. A lot of the women were very young. If you can imagine people who are being sexually assaulted, especially at parties. And these are primarily complaints that went nowhere. And with all of them, some of them were very much like, put my name, I want my photo, publish it, I'm so angry. And I felt it was my responsibility to say, absolutely, I will do that, but I want to talk you through this. You're 18 years old. Do you know what you want to do in your career? Have you talked about this with your friends and parents? Because once you put your name to this, you can never un-Google that. And we're the Globe and Mail. This is probably going to be the primary hit on your Google page the rest of your life, for a long time at least. And a lot of them chose, and like, you know, you want some information there. Best practice is always with a name, of course. But I'm a person, and I don't want this person to be calling me in 10 years saying, now I can't be a lawyer because they think I'm biased against this or something. So we talked it through. A lot of them posed for photos, full portraits. You could see their full face and ran their first name and a last initial, but it's not their full last name, so they won't come up on Google. Like little things like that, and talking things through people, or talking things through. With social media, a lot of them who did want to be named, and they were fine with it, and we talked about it, and they felt good about it, I said, okay, how do we protect you on social media? I'm like, oh no, you can't find me. And then I remember the story ran one day, and one of them, her name was Ava. She actually did come out and fully name herself afterwards, but I saw her come up in my mentions. She like at Robin Doolittle'd me, like, I can't believe the story's finally published, and then linked to it, and I'm like, that's you, I can tell you that's you, and people could find her that way. And so having those conversations with sources, so you're bringing readers into your process, but you're also bringing sources into your process. And it's just a much more, I think, open and transparent way about how we can do our jobs. And I know I talked way too long about that, but it was something I wanted to get off my chest, so.
Just to answer your question as well, I think, surprise, surprise, basic news literacy is required at schools. It's a joke. In the UK, only 2% of 8 to 16-year-olds can spot fake news. That's a shocking stat. That's from the National Literacy Trust. What really kind of shocked me when I was a 21-year-old Cambridge graduate straight into teaching was that the kids would confuse Tony Blair with Ed Miliband. They didn't know who the Prime Minister was. They thought it was really funny. And that was incredibly scary. That's not a surprise for me, sadly, with a lot of the schools we work with. So if that's the kind of basic level of news literacy, political literacy we have, it does explain the democratic disasters that we've experienced recently. And that's why I think it's really important to have an event like this. So well done, Natalie, for starting it. Another thing to add, actually, really quickly, that's quite scary too. We ask our young people, what's your local newspaper? And in London, a lot of them say the Daily Mail and the Guardian, which is crazy. So, and I've explained that to the Daily Mail and the Guardian, and they are really shocked by it. But
why is it crazy? I know it's crazy, but why is it crazy?
Well, because they actually have local newspapers to start with, so they're not reading them. And it's also with the destinations of where they're getting their news from. So it's purely Snapchat Discover. We're speaking about kind of emerging issues with fake news and misinformation. We're talking about deep fakes, and this is another one. They have really poor news diets, and it's not diverse enough.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, I'm Philip. I work for the membership platform Steady, and I have a question regarding measurement of trust and the things. So we learned in this panel and in many other talks importance about trust and engagement, and World News Day seems to be a cool tool to foster that on the newsroom level with small and bigger newsrooms. So do you have any experience? First question, with your partners and the people working on the World News Day, that you could increase trust and engagement with your readers? Is there any way you can measure it already? And question to Madhav, is maybe Google News Initiative working on providing tools to measure trust, engagement, those kinds of stuff? Thank you.
Shall I answer that?
Yes.
We actually, as part of GNI, work with the Reuters Institute for the study of journalism at the University of Oxford, which is a real mouthful to say. And they do something called the Digital News Report. And so in that, they have been tracking trust for a number of years now. they're going to be announcing the results, and I don't know if Nick's not in the room, neither. So I don't think anybody from Reuters is in the room. But they're going to be announcing the results of the digital news report in June at the Global Editors Network conference. Yeah.
Individual level, so trust between the reader and a specific publication. So I, as a journalist, can see the rising of the trust.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So for those of you who didn't hear, the question was, but that's on an aggregate level. How do you do it at a publication level or at a news outlet level? Yeah, I think that's a great piece of feedback actually, and I think we should go talk to the Reuters Institute to figure out what could that tool be, what's the right methodology to work on that.
I'm just trying to quickly Google here because I just did a panel on this, but my brain is a little mush trying to remember everything. But we have a Edelman company that does a trust barometer every year of Canadian media, and I believe trust went up this year in media for the first time in quite a while, or it's been steadily increasing. So at least in Canada, I think you're seeing more trust in media. What's interesting in my country that's kind of happening for the first time is because we're so heavily influenced by the United States, I think you're seeing an increasing polarization and these kind of splinter alternative media groups that are sort of, and I won't name any of them because they'll sue me, but that are kind of branching off and are collecting direct subscriber payments. And some of the conservative politicians are kind of adopting the Trump attack line of fake news, kind of that we're the enemy of the people. And I'd be really curious to see in a couple of years how that impacts the trust. I think for us, you do see a pretty good trust in media, but it's skewing in the wrong way in terms of what I can see of what's happening in the landscape. But we should be monitoring it maybe even more detailed than how Edelman does it within the industry so that we can know what we're fighting against.
Yeah, I don't want to give away any of the Reuters stuff beforehand, but what I found interesting in some of the stuff that they shared with me and told me not to talk about, which I'm about to talk about.
Talk about it. No one tweet it. Shut the cameras off. Just kidding.
Was actually that you need to get beneath the surface of just this, the surface level is trust going up or down. And essentially what was happening in the US is the trust is polarizing. So actually I think they did Democrats and Republicans, and trust, seemed to have been, and I can't remember, it may have been flatline, but what was happening, it was slightly going up amongst Democrats and it was plummeting amongst Republicans. So I think there's a lot of devil in the detail when it comes to trust. And I do think, coming back to the World News Day, is that there is no one thing that is going to, build trust in any single news outlet in the industry overall. There need to be multiple efforts across long periods of time. As everybody, it's that old trope, right? Trust is really hard to earn and really easy to lose, right? And I think we've lost it, right? And so it's incumbent upon all of us to try and build that back up.
I was in Jay Rosen's session yesterday, and he said something really interesting that, you can feel is true, but he articulated it really well. When politicians just outright lie, there used to be this gentleman's agreement that they wouldn't totally lie, but they would spin stuff and say it kind of wrong. But when they outright lie, they put us in this position where there is going to be conflict because we have to say that's not true. When I was covering Rob Ford, my colleague that I worked with at City Hall, Daniel Dale, a Canadian journalist at the Toronto Star, we struggled with that so much because the mayor would just completely make things up. And then when we would say, well, that's not true, his supporters would be like, you're so biased against him, you have nothing nice to say ever. And we're literally just doing our jobs. He is now covering Trump, and he's doing this amazing tracker of all of Trump's lies. I will say Daniel, I think, was the first journalist really that actually started doing that and prompted the big media outlets in the States to try to do that. But it's because, and he and I talked about this, so I think it's okay to say, but it's because of his time at City Hall that he learned that you have to just call mistruths what they are. You can't kind of tiptoe around the fact that this person is just outright lying or saying something that's false. And I think that is part of the problem, is now that this is kind of widespread practice, journalists are in this position where we have to look like we're in conflict with political leaders when we're not. So it's so important to, as much as possible, talk to the public about it. This is why we have to do what we do, and walk them through our process of fact-checking, and also make sure we fact-check everybody. And then you can, I think that that's always really beneficial too, when you do both sides and keep a running idea of both sides. You obviously can't do that for every single thing, but if there's a debate, for example, you can say how many mistruths are on each side.
Over here, yeah. Very patient, yeah.
Hi, I'm Jessica from the U.S., but I'm studying at BCU in England. I think World News Day is actually quite interesting because I ran into quite a few people just walking around on the train, and if I talk about how I'm studying journalism, I immediately get this look like, ooh, okay, yeah. And it's, I don't know, it's kind of, you have to defend what you're doing, and so it's kind of it's encouraging, but at the same time, you're having to constantly defend why you're going into what you're doing. So I don't know. I find this topic quite interesting because, like I said, especially they'll connect me with the United States, and Trump, of course, has destroyed journalists in a way. So I don't know. I guess it's just. I'm wondering what you would do in situations like that, and how you can kind of, I guess, build journalists up, I guess.
I mean, you think back, I don't know, 30 years ago in the industry, were people oh, you're a journalist? I don't know. I think probably not. From what I've heard, that wasn't happening. And it very much, I get those eye rolls too. I grew up in a very conservative part of small town farmland Canada, and I am shocked at the people that I grew up with and they're, in my orbit, how likely they are to believe a fake news story that is so obviously wrong. There was a kind of a meme going around in that world a couple weeks ago that was claiming something ridiculous about the Trudeau government bringing in refugees, and they were attaching it to this member of parliament who hadn't been in parliament for a decade. And it was just so easily dismissed, but they wholeheartedly believed it and were spreading it, and people are liking it and resharing it. And it's we're up against unicorns, basically. How do you fight a mythical, magical unicorn? Those stories are, we all know confirmation bias. We want to believe things that fit our own worldview. And there's this increasing radicalization that I think is happening online that's making us harder to believe because we're, telling the boring truth, the unpleasant, boring truth.
If I'm allowed, we have Jeff Jarvis in the room. And Jeff, we are ramping up for our World News Day 2019. And I know this has struck a chord with you, with the work you do at the Newmark School. And Jeff, I want you to take a moment to tell us why you think this is important now more than ever. And microphone, please.
Give him the auto-tune one.
Yes, auto-tune.
Just to close out.
Yeah. We'll give him a beat up
here.
Yeah,
I'll get it.
It's on its way.
While it's on its way, I hope we're fighting zombie dragons, not unicorns. But
I was told to get up.
They're scarier.
I think that with trust at an all-time low, and we're working on that, we're working on projects about quality, it's just simply important to talk about the value of journalism. But I'm also enthused that we're not going to do that in the way that the industry is doing too much. Right? The industry says you acts like it was always trusted when it wasn't. It acts like you should trust us. We have to earn that trust. So I think that's what the value of Newsday is to show those cases where we do earn that trust. I also like that it's international. We in America tend to be a little too xenophobic these days, especially, and I think that's valuable. And I'm glad that you're using both media outlets and journalism schools to do this together.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks.
We are getting ready for our second World News Day event, this time North America, and we have a host of journalists on our stage from news outlets in Mexico, in the US, and in Canada, speaking to their sources and demystifying, as we keep talking about what they do every day. This is one event, and it's not meant to let anyone off the hook. This is a tentpole event, and we want everyone in our camp, and we'd welcome your thoughts on, additional thoughts on those 5 ways, and I think we have a 6th way with Solomon on how you can participate and how we can amplify this on a global scale and show our value and the power of journalism to citizens in the world. And that is our call today. As Maria said yesterday in our keynote, this is a time to fight tooth and nail, and it's a global battle. And we're looking to you to join us in that global battle.
Have a good rest of your day.
I have, no, sorry, bad timed cough. So I was just going to say a few things, which is I do think this is an ongoing issue, an ongoing thing that we should do. I think we've got 2019 World News Day coming up, like literally right around the corner. But in my head, as I've talked about this, I feel like what we should be doing from today and what we've been doing is actually a path to 2020, right? If 2020 you had World News Day, where all the major news outlets across the world really celebrated the power of journalism, I think it would be incredibly powerful. Doing things such as, working with organizations like the Student View. What Solomon is doing in the United Kingdom is amazing. You should find him afterwards. This man is astonishing what he's doing, because the work that he's doing with the kids has a really important influence to try and work through effectively the democratic deficit that we find ourselves in with journalism being under attack. And so I really encourage all of you to look at those 5, 6 things that can be done. I think the editor of the Globe and Mail, David Walmsley, came up with a 7th, which he said, there's a video that I think World Association of Newspapers put together about Rappler and Maria Resser and her team, which is an incredibly powerful piece of video about the power of journalism. And he said, just if you do nothing else, put this video on your website on that day, because it is a really amazing testament. I don't know if it was shown in her...
it was shown, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house.
It's an amazing piece of video. I've seen it several times, and it still chokes me up. There are these things that we should continue to do, because it's too important not to do anything.
And I'd say follow the handle on social media. That's a good start as well, because we need to generate a buzz.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Have a great day.